Behind the screaming guitars and thunderous drums of heavy metal lie stories so shocking they almost sound made up. We're not just talking about bands breaking up. You won't believe the tale of one band from Norway whose story involved burnt-down buildings and a conflict so intense it left some members gone forever. 1. Dave Mustaine from Megadeth. Back in the early 1980s, a new kind of fast and aggressive music was being born, and a band called Metallica was at the very center of it. Their lead guitarist was a guy with fiery red hair and even fierier talent named Dave Mustaine. He was a co-writer on many of their earliest hits, and his guitar playing was a huge part of their sound. They were on the verge of recording their first album and taking over the world. They were all young guys living together, and things were getting pretty wild. Here's the kicker. Right before they were set to record that album, the other guys in the band had a meeting. They decided that Dave's behavior had become too unpredictable. He was getting into fights and causing a lot of problems. So they woke him up one morning, told him he was out of the band, and put him on a 4-day bus ride back home. Can you imagine? One day, you're about to be in the biggest band ever, and the next, you're on a bus watching your dream drive away. While on that long bus ride, Dave started scribbling down lyrics, filled with anger and a desire for revenge. He decided he would start his own band, and he would make it faster, heavier, and more technical than Metallica. That band became Megadeth. For decades, Dave Mustaine and his old bandmates in Metallica had a very public rivalry. While he became a massive star in his own right, he was forever blacklisted from the band he helped create, and that shadow of being kicked out has followed him his whole career. Being kicked out of your band is tough, but what happens when the band is literally named after you, and they still fire you? Our next star found out the hard way. 2. Ozzy Osbourne from Black Sabbath. There are rock stars, and then there is Ozzy Osbourne. As the original singer for Black Sabbath, he basically helped invent heavy metal. His spooky voice and wild stage presence made him a legend. Black Sabbath was one of the biggest bands in the world during the 1970s, selling millions of albums and playing to huge crowds. Ozzy was the ringleader of their dark circus. But truth be told, Ozzy's off-stage antics were becoming even more famous than his singing. His partying was getting out of control, and he was becoming very unreliable. The other members of the band, who were trying to keep things professional, grew tired of his behavior. They felt he was holding the band back. It all came to a head in 1979 when they made a choice that shocked the music world. They fired Ozzy Osbourne from Black Sabbath, the band he co-founded. For a while, it looked like Ozzy's career was over. He was pushed out by the industry and his own friends. But then, with the help of his manager and future wife Sharon, he launched a solo career that was even more successful than his time in Sabbath. He became an even bigger icon, but he never forgot the sting of being blacklisted by his own band. It was a wake-up call that forced him to build a whole new kingdom for himself, one where he was the only boss. Ozzy's personal choices got him in trouble, but our next musician found himself in the crosshairs, not because of his lifestyle, but because of a single gesture on stage that would haunt him for years. 3. Phil Anselmo from Pantera. In the 1990s, no band was heavier, tougher, or more powerful than Pantera. And at the front of that Texas groove metal machine was their ferocious singer, Phil Anselmo. He was an intense and intimidating frontman with a powerful voice and a commanding stage presence. Pantera was on top of the world, a band that other metal bands were afraid of. They were the kings of the scene. Years later, after Pantera had broken up, Phil was performing at a tribute show for his late bandmate, Dimebag Darrell. At the end of the show, he made a gesture that is associated with hateful ideas and shouted a phrase that echoed the worst parts of history. The whole thing was caught on camera and spread across the internet like wildfire. The backlash was immediate and massive. Festival organizers canceled his band's appearances. Other musicians spoke out against him. He was effectively blacklisted from many parts of the music community. Phil apologized many times. He explained that it was a terrible, thoughtless joke and that he was not a hateful person. He said he had been drinking that night and made a horrible mistake. But the damage was done. That one moment, lasting only a few seconds, tarnished his legacy and made many people in the industry refuse to work with him. It became a permanent stain on the reputation of one of metal's most powerful voices. A single moment of bad judgment can change a career. But what if your troubles came not from one mistake, but from a series of terrible events that led to one of the darkest and most forbidden stories in music history? The band Mayhem. Let's travel to the cold, dark forests of Norway in the early 1990s. A new, extreme form of metal called black metal was emerging, and the most notorious band of them all was named Mayhem. They wanted to be the most extreme band in the world, not just in their music, but in everything they did. Their story is not for the faint of heart. Things started to go down a very dark path. First, their original singer, known as Dead, took his own life. Instead of calling for help, the other band members took pictures of the scene, and one of them even used a photo for an album cover. This shocking act sent a clear message that this band was not playing by any rules of normal society. The industry was horrified, and Mayhem became a name that many people were afraid to even mention. But it got even worse. The band's leader, a guitarist named Euronymous, became involved in a movement that included burning down historic old churches in Norway. Then a deep conflict grew between him and another musician in the scene, Varg Vikernes of the band Burzum. This conflict ended in the most terrible way possible. Varg went to Euronymous' apartment and ended his life. Varg was sent away for a very long time for this and for the church arsons. The band completely fell apart, and their story became a cautionary tale of what can happen when a band's dark image becomes too real. They weren't just blacklisted, they became symbols of a music scene that had gone too far. The story of Mayhem is filled with darkness and tragedy. Our next musician also faced being shunned by the industry, but it was for a very different kind of shocking action, one that he planned himself. 5. Tim Lambesis from As I Lay Dying. In the early 2000s, a genre called metalcore was exploding, and one of the biggest and most respected bands was As I Lay Dying. They were known for their positive and uplifting lyrics, and their lead singer, Tim Lambesis, was seen as a role model by many of their fans. The band was nominated for a Grammy, sold hundreds of thousands of albums, and headlined major festivals around the world. Then, in 2013, news broke that sent a shockwave through the entire metal community. Tim Lambesis had been arrested. The reason was almost unbelievable. He had tried to hire someone to cause serious, permanent harm to his estranged wife. He had met with an undercover officer posing as a hitman and gave him money and information to carry out the terrible act. The man who sang songs about hope and strength had been caught planning something truly dark. The fallout was immediate. As I Lay Dying was dropped from their record label. Their tours were canceled. The band was, for all intents and purposes, finished. Tim was sent away for a number of years. When he was released, he expressed deep remorse for his actions, explaining he had been in a very dark place and had made a monstrous choice. He eventually reformed the band, but many fans and industry people could never look at him the same way again. He was blacklisted in the minds of many who felt he had betrayed everything his band once stood for. Planning a harmful act is one way to get blacklisted, but what if you become an outcast because of a wave of accusations about your behavior behind closed doors? Our next artist learned this lesson in a very public way. 6. Marilyn Manson. For decades, Marilyn Manson was the king of shock rock. He built a career on being scary, controversial, and pushing people's buttons. With his creepy makeup, industrial metal sound, and rebellious attitude, he became a huge star in the late 90s and 2000s. He was the person parents were afraid of, which only made his young fans love him more. He was a master of grabbing headlines and keeping his name in the news. Then things took a very serious turn. Starting around 2021, a wave of very serious accusations began to surface from his past partners and associates. His ex-fiancée, actress Evan Rachel Wood, and several other women came forward with stories of terrible mistreatment and control during their relationships with him. They described a pattern of behavior that was far beyond a simple shock rock image. These were deeply disturbing claims about how he treated people in his private life. As more and more stories came out, the industry that had once celebrated his shocking nature quickly turned its back on him. His record label dropped him immediately. His booking agent, who gets him his live shows, quit. He was edited out of television shows he had appeared in. In a matter of weeks, Marilyn Manson went from being a controversial icon to an industry outcast. He was completely blacklisted, with his career put on hold as he faced the consequences of the serious accusations made against him. Being accused by others is one thing, but our next musician found himself blacklisted because of a fight he picked himself, a fight against his own fans and the entire internet. 7. Lars Ulrich from Metallica. By the year 2000, Metallica was more than a band. They were a global institution. They were arguably the biggest heavy metal band on the planet, with millions of devoted fans who would buy every album and sell out every concert. Lars Ulrich, the band's drummer and co-founder, was one of the most recognizable faces in music. He was known for being outspoken and for being the business-savvy mind in the group. Then came a new thing called the Internet and a service called Napster. For the first time, people could share music files for free. One day, Lars discovered that an unreleased Metallica song was being passed around on Napster before the band had even finished it. He and the band got very angry. They decided to take a stand and sued Napster, becoming the most famous faces in the fight against digital music sharing. Lars became the main spokesman for the cause. The backlash from fans was incredible. Many saw it as a band of super-rich millionaires picking on a new technology and on their own fans. Lars was painted as a greedy rock star who was out of touch. He became the subject of jokes and intense criticism. For a time, he was one of the most disliked figures in music. This blacklisting was different. It wasn't from the industry, but from a huge portion of his own fan base. They felt betrayed. Eventually, the world changed, and streaming became normal. But for many people, Lars Ulrich is still the guy who tried to shut down Napster. Angering your fans is a risky move. But our next star didn't just anger them. He sparked full-blown riots, making him one of the most unpredictable frontmen in history. 8. Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses. In the late 80s and early 90s, Guns N' Roses was the most dangerous band in the world, and their lead singer, Axl Rose, was the ultimate wild card. With his unique screeching voice, bandana, and snake-like dance moves, he was a mesmerizing frontman. The band's debut album, Appetite for Destruction, is one of the best-selling of all time, and they were playing it in stadiums all over the globe. But Axl developed a reputation for being incredibly difficult. The band would often go on stage hours late, leaving tens of thousands of fans waiting and getting angry. He would often stop shows in the middle to yell at security guards or audience members. The most famous incident happened in St. Louis in 1991. Axl saw someone in the crowd with a camera, which he didn't allow. When security didn't act fast enough, he leaped into the audience himself, tackled the person, and then stormed off stage, ending the concert early. The crowd, which had waited for hours, rioted. They destroyed the venue, causing hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage. After that, Axl was charged by the police, and many cities refused to let the band play there, fearing another riot. He was blacklisted by concert promoters and city officials across the country. His unpredictable behavior eventually led to the complete collapse of the original Guns N' Roses lineup. And for many years, Axl was seen as a rock and roll hermit who had destroyed his own legendary band. Axl's ego and behavior tore his band apart. Our next story is also about a band's painful breakup, but this one involved a physical fight and family members being turned against each other. 9. Tate from Queensrÿche. Queensrÿche was known as the thinking person's metal band. Through the 80s and 90s, they had huge success with concept albums like Operation Mindcrime, which many fans consider one of the greatest metal albums ever made. The voice behind that success was Tate, a singer with an incredible vocal range and a dramatic theatrical style. He was the undisputed leader and face of the band. As the years went on, however, tensions grew within the group. The other founding members felt that Geff and his wife, who was the band's manager, were taking too much control. They disliked the direction the music was going and felt they were being pushed out of their own band. Things reached a boiling point before a show in Brazil in 2012. A huge argument broke out backstage, and reports say that a physical altercation happened between Geff and the other members. After that incident, the other members of Queensrÿche made a bold move. They fired Tate, but it wasn't that simple. A nasty legal battle followed, with both Geff and the rest of the band claiming they had the right to use the name Queensrÿche. For a while, there were two different bands touring under the same name. Eventually, the courts decided in favor of the original members. Geff was officially blacklisted from the band he had fronted for 30 years. He lost the name and the legacy he had built, forced to watch his old band continue on with a new singer. Losing the rights to your own band name is a tough blow. But what if your career is derailed by a piece of clothing you wore on stage just one time? That's what happened to our next singer. 10. Sebastian Bach from Skid Row. In the golden age of hair metal, Skid Row was a band with a bit more attitude and a heavier sound than most. A huge reason for their success was their young, handsome, and incredibly talented singer, Sebastian Bach. He had a powerhouse voice that could go from a gritty scream to a beautiful high note in an instant. The band's first album was a massive hit, and Sebastian became one of the biggest pinups in rock and roll. But Sebastian was also known for his big mouth and rebellious attitude. In 1989, he wore a T-shirt on stage that had a very offensive and harmful message printed on it. He later claimed a fan threw it on stage, and he put it on without reading it properly. But the picture of him wearing it was printed in a magazine, and the damage was done. He was heavily criticized for being insensitive and promoting a terrible message. This incident, combined with his increasingly difficult behavior and clashes with the rest of the band, put a target on his back. The other members of Skid Row grew tired of the controversy and his ego. In 1996, they fired him. Sebastian Bach, the voice of all their biggest hits, was out. He was blacklisted from the group he led to stardom. He went on to have a solo career and act on Broadway, but he has spent decades talking about a Skid Row reunion that the other members have always refused. That one T-shirt and his fiery personality cost him his spot in one of the era's biggest bands. A poor choice of wardrobe can cause a lot of trouble. Our next story involves a musician who found himself in hot water not for what he wore, but for his very public and extreme political statements. 11. Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent, also known as the Motor City Madman, has been a rock and roll fixture for a very long time. He first became famous in the 1970s for his wild guitar playing on hits like Cat Scratch Fever and his high-energy live shows. He was a bona fide guitar hero, known for his caveman persona and his raw, powerful rock sound. As time went on, however, Ted became more famous for his strong political opinions than for his music. He became a very vocal supporter of certain political causes and was known for making extreme and controversial statements about politics, hunting, and other hot-button issues. He would use his concerts as a platform to give long speeches, which often angered people who just came to hear the music. Because of his outspoken and often inflammatory comments, many in the mainstream music industry began to distance themselves from him. Radio stations were hesitant to play his music. Major festivals were reluctant to book him. He was blacklisted by a large part of the entertainment world that found his views too extreme. While he maintained a loyal following of fans who agreed with him, his ability to reach a wider audience was severely limited. He became a polarizing figure, a hero to some and a villain to others, whose musical legacy is now often overshadowed by his political commentary. Being blacklisted for your political views is one thing, but what if the government itself tries to blacklist you and your entire genre of music? Our next rocker stood up and fought back. 12. Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. In the mid-1980s, Twisted Sister was a force of nature. With their crazy makeup, big hair, and anthems like "We're Not Gonna Take It," they were poster children for rebellious rock and roll. Their frontman, Dee Snider, was a smart, funny, and very loud spokesman for kids who felt like outsiders. He was the ultimate symbol of sticking it to the man. Well, in 1985, the man decided to stick it to him. A group of influential people in Washington, D.C., called the PMRC, decided that heavy metal music was a danger to America's youth. They created a list of songs they called the Filthy 15 and accused bands of promoting negative ideas. They wanted to put warning labels on albums, and they held a big hearing in front of the U.S. Senate to make their case. They expected the rock stars to be foolish and easy to beat. They did not expect Dee Snider. While other musicians sent letters, Dee showed up in person to testify. Without his makeup, he looked like a regular guy. He gave an intelligent, passionate, and well-reasoned speech defending his music and the freedom of speech. He completely dismantled the arguments of the committee, pointing out how they had misunderstood his lyrics. While the committee did succeed in getting warning stickers on albums, Dee's performance was a huge victory for rock music. For a short time, the government tried to blacklist heavy metal, but Dee Snider fearlessly stood up to them and became an unlikely hero for artistic freedom. Dee Snider fought the government over his lyrics. Our next band also found themselves in a courtroom, but they were accused of something much spookier, hiding secret messages that led to a terrible outcome. 13. Judas Priest. Judas Priest is one of the most important and influential heavy metal bands of all time. With Rob Halford's soaring vocals and the twin guitar attack of Glenn Tipton and K.K. Downing, they defined the sound and look of metal in the late 70s and early 80s. They were known as the Metal Gods, a band that commanded respect from every corner of the globe. In 1990, the band found themselves in a situation that sounds like something from a horror movie. They were put on trial. A lawsuit was filed against them blaming their music for the actions of two young men who had made a terrible pact. The lawsuit claimed that the band's album, Stained Class, contained hidden, subliminal messages that, when played backward, told people to do awful things. The accusers argued that these secret messages had caused the tragedy. The band had to go to court and defend their music and their name. It was a massive media spectacle. The idea that Judas Priest, these heavy metal heroes, were secretly trying to harm their fans was a huge scandal. For a time, the band was blacklisted in the court of public opinion, their name associated with this horrible event. The band members had to sit in court as their music was played backward and analyzed. In the end, the judge ruled that there was no evidence of subliminal messages and that the band was not responsible. They won the case, but the trial was a dark cloud that hung over them for years. Being falsely accused is a nightmare. Our next musician wasn't accused by strangers. He was kicked out by his own band, and he responded by making one of the most famous revenge albums ever. 14. Ronnie James Dio from Black Sabbath. After Black Sabbath fired Ozzy Osbourne, they needed a new singer. They found one in the powerful and majestic voice of Ronnie James Dio. Dio had a completely different style. He sang about castles, dragons, and rainbows, and his voice was like a mighty opera singer's. This new version of Black Sabbath released two incredible albums, Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, which were huge hits and are considered classics by many fans. But just like with Ozzy, tensions began to grow in the band. During the mixing of a live album, a conflict arose between Dio and the other members, Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler. Tony and Geezer accused Dio of sneaking into the studio at night to turn up the volume on his vocals in the mix. They felt he was trying to take over the band. Whether the accusations were true or not, the trust was broken. Ronnie James Dio and the drummer, Vinny Appice, left Black Sabbath in 1982. Dio felt he had been unfairly pushed out and blacklisted by the band he had helped revitalize. So what did he do? He immediately formed his own band, simply called Dio. His first album, Holy Diver, was a massive success. It was filled with songs that felt like a direct response to his firing, all about standing alone, being betrayed, and finding your own strength. It was his ultimate statement that he didn't need Black Sabbath to be a metal god. Dio built his own kingdom after being exiled. Our next artist also saw his career take a nosedive, but it was due to a series of personal struggles that played out in public for years. 15. Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots. During the 90s, Stone Temple Pilots, or STP, was one of the biggest rock bands in the world. They blended heavy, sludgy guitar riffs with beautiful, catchy melodies. At the center of it all was their charismatic and enigmatic frontman, Scott Weiland. He had a unique voice and a slinky, rock star stage presence that made him a captivating performer. But behind his talent, Scott battled serious personal demons for most of his life. These struggles made him very unreliable. He would often show up late to concerts, or sometimes not show up at all. His performances could be erratic. The other members of STP, and later his other band, Velvet Revolver, grew frustrated. They tried to help him, but his problems continued to affect their ability to tour and record. Eventually, both bands had to make the difficult decision to move on without him. In 2013, STP officially fired Scott Weiland, the iconic voice of all their hits. They hired a new singer to continue the band. Scott was effectively blacklisted from the two major bands he was famous for. His immense talent was constantly overshadowed by his personal issues, which prevented him from maintaining the success he had earned. It's a sad story of a gifted artist whose own struggles became his biggest enemy, leading the industry to sadly give up on him. It's tragic when a musician's personal life derails their career. Our next story is about a guitarist whose career was instantly ended by a single, very public criminal act. 16. John Schaffer from Iced Earth. For over 30 years, the band Iced Earth was a pillar of the American heavy metal scene. They were known for their powerful, galloping riffs and epic songs about history, war, and fantasy. The leader, main songwriter, and rhythm guitarist of the band was John Schaffer. He was the heart and soul of Iced Earth, a respected veteran of the metal world. Then, on January 6, 2021, a shocking event took place at the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. A large group of people illegally entered the building in protest. A few days later, a photo from inside the Capitol began to circulate online. It showed a man in the crowd, pointing and shouting. Metal fans around the world immediately recognized him. It was John Schaffer. The fallout was swift and absolute. John was identified by the authorities and later arrested for his role in the event. In the music world, he was immediately blacklisted. His bandmates in Iced Earth all quit, releasing statements that they did not support his actions. The band's record label dropped them. John's other musical projects also fell apart. In one day, his decades-long career in music was completely destroyed by his choice to participate in that event. He went from being a celebrated metal guitarist to a federal defendant, a clear sign that some lines, when crossed, can never be uncrossed, never be uncrossed, never be uncrossed.